Welcome back, Sebastian here. So time for my power rankings for the Brazilian Grand Prix. So I just want to reiterate before I start that, these power rankings are not just for the Brazilian Grand Prix. They're basically accumulation of what I think is usually the last three, how I feel a driver is doing over the last 3 or 4 races. So starting in 20th, not Sergio Perez for the first time in quite a while, spoiler. But dropping 2 spots is Kevin Magnussen in 20th. Now, for Magnussen and the driver, I have in 19th. I felt that they were very, very close. And for me, the deciding factor was the fact that, Magnussen basically crashed out on that opening lap. Was a racing incident, but that being said, in a racing incident, all the drivers involved generally have to take a little bit of the blame for that. Being a little bit more careful and stuff and not being as aggressive. For Magnussen, recently hasn't been as good. Did I think out-qualify Hulkenberg in the sprint qualifying and then beat him in the sprint, but still recently hasn't been a particularly good run of form for him. Now, 19 staying in the same spot as last race is Logan Sargent. Now, I could have justified moving Sargent down to 20th, but I did feel like Sargent had a pretty good Grand Prix. Finished 11th place, pretty good result, just 1 spot outside the points. Obviously, a counter argument to that is that, there was a lot of DNFs and Ricciardo and Piastri were basically a lap down, so they don't really count. For Sargent though, all the cars that would have been around the same pace as him, the Alfa Romeos, his teammate Albon, they weren't in the race, so it was really hard to really compare his pace against cars that were about the same as him. Of course, beat Hulkenberg and Haas, but of course, that's not really much of an accomplishment. Now, 18th, moving down 2 spots, is Zhou Guanyu. So for Zhou, not a whole lot to say. Retired from the race with mechanical DNF. Hasn't been particularly good in qualifying. Recently, I've noticed, is that something that I've noticed. I talked about this in my video about Zhou, quite a while ago now. But, the qualifying has not really improved a whole lot since last year, which is a bit of a troubling sign. But the race pace has been good, but, recently not particularly great results. Now, 17th, moving up 3 spots from 20th is Sergio Perez. And this is what I mean when these power rankings are not a reflection of just this weekend's Grand Prix, this case being the Brazilian Grand Prix. For Perez, I think it was a better result, much better result than many of the recent Grand Prix we've had. Better than Mexico, better than, I would say, about the same as Coda, maybe a little bit better than Coda. Definitely better than Qatar, for example. So for Perez though, almost gets that podium, nicked on the last lap by Alonso. He probably should have had that one being in the Red Bull. Shouldn't have been overtaken on the final lap, but still a better result than we've seen recently. Number 16, dropping 2 positions, is Daniel Ricciardo. So for Ricciardo, I don't really, for the race today, I think he actually had really good pace. He was gaining on Hulkenberg. If you kind of do the math, the mental math of, taking his time relative to Hulkenberg and putting him back, not a lap down, he probably finishes 11th or 12th in that race. Maybe gets a point. But for Ricciardo, I think unfortunate result in qualifying. Was out-qualified both times by Tsunoda. The sprint wasn't as good as Tsunoda's, but still was a good weekend, but not as good as Mexico. So I've dropped him down 2 spots. Now, number 15, also dropping 2 spots, is Valtteri Bottas. And, for Bottas, this is not because of him being particularly poor, but I had just had 2 other drivers that I wanted to move up. For Bottas, similar to Zhou, mechanical DNF in the race, doesn't finish the race. I think he did decently well in the sprint. I'm trying to remember. I think he did decently well in the sprint. So for Bottas, not a great weekend, but still, he's been doing decently well last several races. Number 14, moving up 3 positions, is Lance Stroll. So really good result for Stroll. I think probably, arguably his best race of the year, probably his best result really since Bahrain, I think, which was the first race of the season with his broken wrist. Of course, for Stroll, out-qualified Alonso, hadn't done that in a while. In the sprint, was a little bit behind him, But, you know, in the race day, I think in race pace, he was not that far off Alonso, which is where he needed to be all season. Unfortunately, that Stroll hasn't been there for the vast majority of the season. But for this race, and this race alone, honestly, really good result. Kind of hurt himself at the start, having both starts and then losing multiple positions at both restarts, basically dropping down from what was virtually second place. But still, you know, a really good weekend for Stroll, so he moves up 3 positions. Number 13, moving down 1 position, is Nico Hülkenberg. So for Hülkenberg, really tough weekend for him. I think the Haas just didn't have the pace. And I think in terms of, you know, teammate battle, I think he split both the qualifying and the sprint, split the qualifying and the races with his teammate. So basically 1-1 apiece, so not really a whole lot to say there. And I think for Hülkenberg, didn't really have the pace today. The car was just really poor on its tires this weekend. Number 12, moving down 2 spots, and a driver that's been, I think, quite disappointing through this North American run is George Russell. So for Russell, the results in the sprint was okay, but in the Grand Prix today, you could tell that there was a point where he started really attacking Hamilton, and he really wanted team orders to overtake him. But then shortly afterwards, and after Mercedes basically said no, he just started dropping down like a stone, and basically ended up DNFing. I don't know where he would have finished without that. He probably stays ahead of Tsunoda. Maybe Tsunoda gets him at the end, but for Russell, you know, three or 4 weekends in a row now where, actually no, not 3. I think, not 4, 3. The 3 North American rounds, Hamilton's looked much better than him, especially in race pace, and that's something that Russell is going to be wanting to key in on and try to find ways to improve and figure out where that deficiency is. Number 11, moving up 4 spots, is Yuki Tsunoda. So for Tsunoda, really fantastic weekend for him. A really good rebound from a pretty terrible weekend in Mexico. Gets points in the sprint. I believe that was 6th place in the sprint and then 9th place today. So points in both sprints and the Grand Prix in an AlphaTauri is a really well done job for him. Actually, no. What am I doing? Oh, good grief. Okay. I've written Tsunoda in the wrong spot, haven't I? Okay. I'm going to go get my marker and we'll be right back with that. Okay, so, sorry Tsunoda fans, I'm not putting him in 10th place. I'm going to have to fix that. Tsunoda's in 11th place, not 10th place. But anyway, for Tsunoda, really good result for him, getting those points, and I think it's starting to scare Williams. I think they are starting to be a bit concerned by the pace of the AlphaTauri, and that I think if they have 2 excellent weekends in Vegas and Abu Dhabi to close out the year, they might be knocking on Williams' 7th place in the Constructors' Championship. And also, I accidentally gave Tsunoda 5 extra points in my review this morning. But that being said, really good result for him. Now, number 10, moving up 1 position, is Esteban Ocon. So for Ocon, after a pretty terrible Saturday, not taking himself and Alonso out from the sprint qualifying, I know that's a whole debate in of itself. And then in sprint, I don't think was able to really capitalize that much on the position from a pretty terrible qualifying position. Today, I don't think was particularly great either. Gasly looked like the much quicker driver in the Grand Prix, but for Ocon, he does salvage a point, which is, I think, in an Alpine is still a decent result. I think we'll be a bit miffed to be behind the AlphaTauri and to be so far adrift of his teammate Gasly, but still not a terrible weekend for Ocon. Number 9, dropping 2 positions in my power ranking. Very tough weekend for this driver, and that is Oscar Piastri. So for Piastri, I think this is probably in the second half of the season at least, this is probably the weekend where he's had the biggest gap between himself and his teammate Lando Norris. Qualifying was a struggle, kind of going off track in Q3. In sprint qualifying, I believe got knocked out. Did he get knocked out? Yeah, I believe he got knocked out pretty early in sprint qualifying, unless I've gotten that completely wrong. But the main point is that today in the Grand Prix, of course, got that damage. That was completely unavoidable from his end. I think it was just some really minor contact. Unfortunately, doing the repairs in the garage, not in the pit lane, meant that he was basically a lap down. Unfortunately, lost to Ricciardo, and I think that's something that he probably should have been ahead of Ricciardo given the pace in the McLaren. But, for Piastri, he's still young, still learning. It's still his rookie season, and it's still a lot of tracks that he basically has very little knowledge of. But the good news for him is that all of these new tracks, he'll come back, he'll learn, he'll be stronger, and next year he'll come back with a lot more experience on all of these circuits. So number 8, also dropping 2 positions. I think this is a bit harsh, but I'm dropping it. So Carlos Sainz down 2 positions to 8th. For Sainz, I think he looked like the slower Ferrari driver for most of this weekend, got out-qualified by Leclerc in both qualifying sessions. Leclerc was the better driver in the sprints as well. And then I think really just unfortunately for Leclerc, his Ferrari decided it didn't want to race today. So he didn't start the race, and Sainz ends up in a pretty respectable 6th place ahead of the both Mercedes, which I was not entirely expecting given that Ferraris had some absolutely shocking Sundays this year. But for Sainz, a really good points haul, but still I don't think he was the strongest Ferrari driver this weekend. Now, moving up 2 positions, a really, really strong driver from this week, I think, and that is Pierre Gasly. So for Gasly, let's see, I'm gonna have to think. Yeah, 7th place finish ahead of both Mercedes. Really good job from him. I did not expect the Alpines to be ahead of the Mercedes in the races. I thought, maybe the tire issues from the sprint would be a one-off and they might figure out a way around that overnight, but of course that wasn't the case. But for Gasly, doing a really good job in the Alpine second half of the year has been very strong. Of course, Ocon's had been some pretty bad luck, but still, you kind of have to create your own luck. And for Gasly, I think he's come on really strongly in the second half of the season, and I'm really excited to see what he could do next year. Let's see, number 6, dropping 1 position is Alex Albon. So for Albon, not a whole lot to say. Crashed out of the Grand Prix on the opening lap, same as Magnussen. Could have been avoidable. I'm not sure. I think on the replay, he comes in quite aggressive from quite far back, but he's already on the edge of the track on his side. And Hulkenberg, who is on the far left, or I guess was on the inside of the track, had a bit more space there. But of course, similar to so many of these 3-car crashes that we've seen recently, the driver on the inside has very little knowledge about that driver on the far side being there. And you can't really blame them for that. But still, for this, it was kind of like a convergence of lines kind of issue. But for Albon, not a big deal, but still I've dropped in 1 position. The pace has still been pretty good, and I've qualified Sargent in both sessions. Now, number 5, moving up 3 positions, is Fernando Alonso. So really good result for Alonso. First podium since Zandvoort, very well earned for him. I think surprisingly Aston Martin had pretty decent pace this weekend, as seen by Stroll finishing in 5th place. But still, Alonso, I think, did an excellent job to hold off Perez for as long as he did, and then somehow managing that final lap overtake. So for Alonso, really well, a job really well done, and he moves up to 5th. Now, let's see, 4th, dropping 2 positions. Oh, this team had an absolute shocker of a weekend, didn't it? And that is Lewis Hamilton. So for Hamilton, drops to 4th. I'm not going to blame Hamilton too much for this. It's pretty clear that Mercedes had something very wrong with their setup, and of course being locked into part firme conditions from Friday meant that they couldn't really do a whole lot with the car. But still, for Hamilton, I do feel like one driver, well, I'll talk about that one driver, but there was another driver that passed him that I think had an excellent weekend. So for Hamilton, not a terrible weekend, but still I'm dropping him 2 positions. Now, 3rd, staying in the same spot as last race is Charles Leclerc. So for Leclerc, I don't really have a whole lot to say. It's clear that Ferrari basically decided that it didn't want to race the Grand Prix today. Ferrari need to get on top of that and figure out why on earth that happened. That's not really acceptable to have the hydraulics failing on the formation lap of a Grand Prix. It's something that we should not be seeing, especially this late in the season when, some of those random kinks that should be sorted out at the start happen, or even in winter testing preferably. Looked very good this weekend, looked like clearly the faster of the 2 Ferrari drivers, but unfortunately couldn't really show that pace in the race. It was okay in the sprint, made up some positions, finished 5th, I believe, in the sprint. But for Leclerc, another tough weekend. Number 2, moving up 2 positions pretty clearly is Lando Norris. So excellent result for him. Very strong pace in the McLaren. I was not expecting them to be as close to Verstappen as he was. Of course, Max was probably, managing it quite a bit. but still really good showing and really outclassed his teammate Piastri. So getting that sprint pole, podium, kind of sprint, did he get a sprint? Yeah, he did sprint podium. And then of course getting the P2 in the main Grand Prix, pretty much almost maximized his result. And he is now looking like he has a very good chance of P4 in the Drivers' Championship. I don't think he's going to be able to make a run at P2. He would basically need like 2 second places and Hamilton getting no points, roughly, for the last 2 races. But still, stranger things have happened in Formula One. Now, number one, I could probably just write this at the start of the video and then not really worry about it. And that is Max Verstappen. So for Verstappen, I don't know, not a whole lot to say. Really well, job really well done. Of course, wins the sprint, wins the main Grand Prix as well. Broke Alberto Ascari's 70-year-old record for percentage of wins in a season. So that's something. Extends his current win record for wins in a season as well. So was very comfortable out there and really job really well done. So I feel like I've been saying that phrase too much in this video, but. So that's all for my power rankings for the Brazilian Grand Prix. Thank you so much for watching. Of course, we now have a 2-week break finally after that North American, or I guess America's triple header. And we're back in 2 weeks with Vegas. In the meantime, I think I'm going to be doing a video talking about sprints and maybe things that I hope that they change for next year. So again, thank you so much for watching and goodbye.